Stephen Lester. Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephen Lester. I'm the Science Director here at the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice. For those of you who may not be familiar with CHEJ, we provide organizing and technical assistance to grassroots community groups nationwide. We've started in 1981 and were founded by Lois Gibbs, who organized the community at Love Canal in Niagara Falls, New York. We're very pleased today. This is to welcome Judith LeBlanc, our guest speaker for our training call today. We run these training calls once a month, third Tuesday of every month, and we have different speakers, and we try to share with you different organizing skills and experiences, and try to provide you with more resources to be more effective at the work you all do. Just a few logistic things before we get started. Everybody is automatically muted when you come on to the call. We're gonna, in a minute or so, I will introduce Judith. I think we'll have a short film that Judith has asked us to share, and then Judith will share some of her experiences. And then after a little bit, we'll have a Q&A period, which I'll monitor. Hunter, who's producing the call for us, will be keeping track of the chat. So if you have questions that come up during the presentation by Judith, please put it in the chat or write notes, and you can we'll call you later. So that's kind of how we'll run the time. I am really excited and thrilled that we have Judith LeBlanc with us today. Judith has her fingers in so many pies that we're very lucky and fortunate that she's giving us this time to share with you all some of her experiences in organizing on Native land. I met Judith, I think it's now 7 years. I was thinking about this 7 years ago. And it was at a meeting at People's Actions, which at the time was the parent company for both our groups. And she used a word that struck me. In the first 30 seconds of her raising a question, she used the word relationality. And that just hit me. And I was like, wow. And I had not heard that. I was not familiar with that term. And I'll leave it to Judith to maybe say more about that. But it really speaks a lot to how Native folks think about not just their work, but the people they work with. And there's a sense of relationship there that I find, I mean, I don't know, I'm not an organizer by training, but I find very valuable and important in organizing. Judith is a citizen of Caddo Nation. She's executive director of the Native Organizing Alliance, which she's done for, I guess, about 8 years or so. And she has lots of credentials as an organizer. They do a lot of training and support for various organizations, certainly tribes and groups. She introduced me to a group, the Braveheart Society, that I'm doing some work with in South Dakota. Been involved in that for maybe 3 or more years now. It's been, and it's been a fascinating and wonderful experience for me. It's been a big and important part of my work in the last 3 years. So Judith, I will welcome. Thank you for being here. I'll turn things over to you at this point. We're ready to go with the video, or you can say a few words and then we can go however you want to handle it.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me and thank all of you for joining the call. I know how busy everyone is, especially right now. So many things going on, and I appreciate it. And it's an honor really to be invited by CHEJ and by Stephen and Lois to be in relationship with you. But our framework for organizing is that all things come about by understanding how you are in relationship, how, and also what you do with that relationship. How do you honor the responsibilities that you have when you are in relationship? So I have so appreciated in the last 4 years working with Stephen, because I've seen him come into a community where he had never been and understood that there are protocols and ways of relating that is not the norm when people, especially highly skilled people like Stephen come into our community to offer assistance. And I have such great respect for that. So thank you for inviting me.
It's our pleasure too.
So I thought we'd get the ball rolling by, actually, it's a little video about relationality, about relationships, and how we are all, whether we like it or not, or we choose to recognize we are all in a relationship. So I want to say something like they say on TV and the movies. Okay, hit it, Hunter. I don't know why I have that urge.
For the last 20 years, the House of Tears carvers of the Lummi Nation have transported totem poles around the world as a way of bringing communities together and highlighting issues. This year is our biggest journey yet. A large coalition of Indigenous and non-Indigenous groups have gathered and supported this project where we're driving a 25-foot totem pole across the country, stopping at many sacred and historic places under threat from dams, climate change, and resource extraction. As the totem pole moves, it carries the spirits of the land it visits. It's like a battery that charges as it travels. As people touch it, they give it power. As it moves on, it shares that power with the next community it visits. This totem pole draws lines of connection between communities fighting for the land and for the future, and against an understanding of development that has been pushing the world towards extinction. The journey will end in Washington, D.C., where it will be delivered to the Biden administration as a strong and important message. It's a reminder of the promises that were made to the first peoples of these lands and waters, and to the responsibility we all share to safeguard the sacred sources of life, earth, water, sky, for the generations to come.
So in 2021, we worked with the House of Tears traditional carvers from the Lummi Nation, which is located in Washington. And I'll tell you a little bit about that story of how we became in relationship with them and actually succeeded community by community to build our power to impact on the Biden administration's policies on the protection of sacred sites, which has everything to do with the fossil fuel industry, destructive, reckless development projects, and climate change. The work that you do is about our ancestors and descendants. In an Indigenous framework, we center the importance on place, on history and the future, and our role and responsibility in the present. Wherever we live as Indigenous people, as humans, we should be, and we need to be, conscious of the place, the history, the future of that place, and our responsibilities. From an Indigenous framework, that's the starting point for understanding how we walk every day. It's an intertribal understanding that's been told and retold in different versions of origin stories, on stories that have been passed down from generation to generation. So your work, our work as organizers, really is dependent on us being able to understand political power and how we weave it with our values, our spirituality, And that, my friends, is perhaps the strongest power that you can build, is where you're weaving your values with an understanding of the problem and therefore the power that you have to affect, to address the problem. So we were approached by the Lamikawas, the House of Tears, right after the elections in 2020. And they said, we want to make a totem pole that will remind the Biden administration that they have a responsibility. They have their own ancestral responsibility to protect our right to freedom of religion, our sacred places, which are under threat by fossil fuel extractive industries, climate change, and reckless profit-driven development. And we said, yeah, let's do it. And so we joined together with them and another group to bring together the communities that we had already been working with, who were struggling to protect their individual sacred sites. Now, you know as well as I do, the weakest position you can be in is to be one-on-one with the government, one-on-one with the state government, or one-on-one with the federal government. So we decided that we could use and lead with our culture and values to draw together 17 nations who were negotiating one-on-one with the federal government to protect their sacred sites. We all were in relationship one way or another. We never go someplace that we're not invited or where we have a relationship. So in 17 nations, amongst us all, we had relationships. And with every tribal nation and community, people were like, we're on board, let's do this. Let's bring a 5,000-pound, 5-foot long totem on a tractor-trailer truck to a majority of our nations, conduct ceremony, bring our power to bear, build our visibility in the media, and then take it on into DC. And the Biden administration first, they have restrictions that they've actually imposed administration after administration on themselves, which is that it takes a long time to vet a gift. Like it takes a year process to give something to the federal government, to give something to the White House. But because of the power of our prayers and our organizing and the history of organizing in these 17 nations, within 2 weeks of us beginning our road trip, going from nation to nation in a caravan of 20 vans with people from every nation and making our way to DC over 2 weeks, they decided they should accept this totem and put it in a place that would not honor the Carvers, no, but to remind all those who work in the federal government that they have a responsibility to protect our sacred places. This is part of the legacy of a democratic country, right? And it was such a beautiful experience because it was really people believing in the power of being together, of doing something together that could have far bigger results than we ever could have imagined. Because the truth is that this administration has done more around protecting sacred sites than any administration in the past, ever. There's never been this kind of almost a flood of ways to protect places that some places there's been organizing since the beginning of time, like Chaco Canyon and Bears Ears, where the fossil fuel industry has done damage that needs to be remediated. So there are 3 lessons that we learned, not only from that, but from a number of other in native, non-native struggles around health and well-being of our communities. We've learned 3 really important lessons. And I want to see if this rings true in your communities. Number 1, struggling one-on-one on any given issue is a losing proposition. To be effective in challenging city, county, state, or the federal government, strength is in numbers. Who we represent and those who come to join us, to stand shoulder to shoulder with us to remedy the crisis that we're facing in our communities when it comes to the health and well-being of our communities. So allies and having shared values. I mean, I think But this is one of the most important lessons that we've learned all through our work in the last 10 years, that no matter what, relationships matter. Now, Indian country is a small place, I'll tell you. There's a lot of relations. I've had a lot of ex-husbands, and I'm hoping they don't crop up in any one of the communities I get invited to. But the point is this, that relationships matter. And you know, in your own town, your own city, your state, you know the people who are moving in your direction, the people who share the same values about our responsibility to place. That's one lesson. And, you know, an example of this was during the KXL pipeline struggle. You know, it was a 10-year movement and community and tribal government organizing with legal struggles. You know the drill, legal struggles, testimony, getting others to speak out, petitioning. Well, this 10-year struggle to stop the Keystone XL pipeline was, for many of us, Native peoples, a kind of an awakening of an Indigenous framework. Now, this struggle began way before the Dakota Access Pipeline. What we had to come to grips with is that there were farmers and ranchers on that land for 3 generations, minimally, who shared the same values on water and land, health and well-being of our communities. Now, we could have sat back and said, we know how you got that land. This is all land that's stolen. But why? Why would we do that when our values and our responsibility to our ancestors and our descendants meant that we must protect the Missouri River bioregion from destruction of this pipeline? And yeah, after 10 years, we won, but the relationships with the white farmers and ranchers are stronger than family ties. People who got arrested, who faced all kinds of harassment to stand with us. We believe in them and they believed in us, and we won a huge political victory after 10 years. The second most important lesson is a real understanding of the power that we have when we stand together, win, lose, or draw. When we stand together across sectors, cross race, even cross class, we have the potential to win. And in the attempts to overcome adversity, we learn a lot of lessons about them and ourselves. So for instance, the Dakota Access Pipeline, you know, when the Standing Rock Sioux tribe stood up to protect the water supply, the Missouri River, that is the source of the water supply for 10,000 members of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. When they stood up to stop the crossing the Dakota Access Pipeline, they did so knowing that in Bismarck, they had said no, and the pipeline company said, oh, okay. When for 2 to 3 years beforehand, the Standing Rock Sioux tribe kept saying no, they acted like we were invisible. But when the tribe decided to take this fight on, it became clear to all, and it became clear globally, that what the Standing Rock Sioux tribe was doing is standing up for 17 million people who live, love, and work and play along the shores of the Missouri downriver. 17 million people. So it was not a fight for the water for the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. It became a fight to awaken the awareness of many, the majorities, that water is life, that we need to caretake the hydroscape of the Missouri River, for all rivers. I think the lesson of Dakota access level is this. Some said in the beginning, well, at the end, y'all lost. You didn't stop the pipeline. But we won so much more. We won the idea that over 200 tribes and hundreds of thousands of people stood on behalf of the right to sovereignty, for tribal governments to make decisions about the land that we govern. We also won the idea amongst urban and reservation Indians. Now, I'm wicked urban. I wear a high heel on one foot, a moccasin on the other. 70% of us live in urban areas. But the truth is that when Standing Rock began, people from the city and reservations went there to stand together. And it awakened among many urban Indians the idea that the struggle to protect lands and water, no matter where we live, is a righteous one and that we should be engaged in it. And that if something is being done, that we have to take action, something that endangers the health and well-being of the water of our communities, we have to take action. That's a big win. But it didn't happen isolated. The Dakota Access Pipeline fight came in the wake of what I would call a magic movement moment, where you had the Fight for 15 fast food workers, the Black Lives Matter, the Women's March, the oh my goodness, I just put on my alarm, and now I have to stop. 1 second. Alexa, stop.
In Boynton Beach, it's 86 degrees Fahrenheit.
Sorry,
clear skies
Alexa
and
is
sun.
so helpful and yet such a pest. So we won big because that idea of united action, of being in this magic movement moment, moving as many of the communities were to really speak out and interrupt the dominant narratives. The third lesson, that what we're engaged in protecting water and land and fighting the toxic dumps, corporate toxic dumps that have affected our communities, that it's a generational struggle. There's no short road to a horizon that would ensure that there is in government policies the absolute guiding North Star being the health and well-being of communities, of the natural world, and that being the governing value that leads environmental protection and leads legislation. I just want to end by saying that those three lessons are not just about what Native people have learned. It's something from the history of humankind. And the reality is that the power that we are working with at the grassroots level and trying to help people understand their role in the present and the future, it's something that's always been done with great social changes, and huge structural shifts have been made in government policy. I mean, President Roosevelt, maybe he was a nice guy. I don't know. But the truth is that the laws enacted in that administration and the administrative remedies to the Great Depression was not an idea cooked up by individuals in the West Wing or the East Wing or on Capitol Hill. It was when tens of thousands of people, hungry, homeless, jobless, went to their state capitals, got on flatbed trucks, went repeatedly to Washington to demand that the government play its rightful role. So that's how Social Security and unemployment compensation were passed. And so if we're going to protect Mother Earth, then we have to recognize that we are actually representing a majority movement in our country. Poll after poll show that people are concerned about climate change. Poll after poll show that people understand that the extractive fossil fuel industry plays a big role and has a responsibility to respond to the crisis that they're driving. And so when we are doing our work, we have to be mindful that we have to move majorities, but that really, in a moment like this, majorities will move and are thinking in the same direction we are. But we are also faced, for the first time in all of our lifetimes, a mass movement of millions who have diametrically opposed values to ours, who want to erode the rightful role of federal government. That's a mass movement of millions. So it is a generational struggle. It is a generational organizing. You know, I think about, I can't think in 7 generations. Many tribal teachings talk about always thinking ahead 7 generations. I got 2. I can only think of two. That's kind of like the elder in me realizing that I maybe could think seven back in my 20s. Now in my 70s, I think of two. I think of my grandchildren and their children. They're going to be fighting the fights that we are fighting right now. But that's not a source of being downhearted. It's a source of pride about what we do today, what we do. When they point back, what did our ancestors do 30 years ago? We have to have a good answer for them to give and to tell the stories of what we are doing, what we did, the victories we won, and what the losses taught us. So I just appreciate so much, and I'm really so honored to be with you, because place matters. Whether or not you're on an Indian reservation or in the heart of Chicago or at Love Canal, place matters. At least 2 generations, but really 7. And what we do about the history, understanding the history and thinking about the future, what we do in the present determines everything. So from our grandfathers to our ancestors, I think we got to get busy. We got to keep on pushing.
Helps if I take myself off mute. Good words. That was really well said, well stated. Okay, we have some time now for conversation amongst the folks on the line here. So this is an opportunity to ask some questions. Don't be shy. Don't be, reluctant.
I would also add, like, I know that many of you probably have not sat down with Native peoples. So if there's any questions you want to ask and have never had the opportunity to ask an Indian, gone.
Here's your chance. Yeah,
exactly.
Right. So Hunter, have you been monitoring the chat? Do we have any questions there, or are people?
No, someone just asked if they could share their information, but that's it. But we have Renee raised her hand first. Go ahead, Renee.
Okay.
Hi, good afternoon. I really enjoyed your talk. I don't see your name, young lady up here.
Oh, thank you.
What's your name?
Judith LeBlanc.
Judith. Okay, I got you. My name is Renee. I'm with Brettel and Citizens for a Healthy and Safe Environment in Atlanta. And you made a statement that some people have never interacted with the tribal nations, and we haven't. I would like to. So your talk is very, very inspiring and enlightening. Dakota, that pipeline that you fought, it's heartbreaking when we don't get rid of things that are toxic and polluting. And I wanted to know from an emotional aspect, how did that affect you in your work? Because it might not necessarily be a loss. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I do.
Yeah.
I spent I can't multitask. I was putting my name in and I couldn't talk at the same time. Oh my.
It's okay. It's okay.
I spent, let's put it this way. When I used to come out of my tent at Standing Rock, I was not the only one that had used multiple wipes, destroying Mother Earth one wipe at a time with a full face of makeup, because we were styling at Standing Rock. I'll tell you that. But when it ended, that there was a sadness about community, loss of community. Over 10,000 people were there, and there were times I would walk through the village, and it gave me such a sense of wholeness. Hearing singing from different corners, people for the first time in history, that many tribes all together in one place. It was the first time that the Oceti-Sakowin, the tribes in that area, Lakota, Nakota, Dakota tribes, had been together since the Battle of the Little Bighorn. That's how long it was. And so there'd never been a gathering like this in history. And that feeling of community, of understanding that there is power in organizing, there is power in interrupting the dominant narrative, because most people have succumbed to the narrative of colonialism. We were weak, they brought diseases, they overcame, we died, we're gone, get over it. When in fact, we contested for power. We had very strong naval and fishing industry. We had hunting. We controlled the agricultural market. And there was a point in the Bay colony, the time of that period of colonialism, where British currency could no longer be used. And they passed a law certifying that wampum, the currency used by the local tribes, would be the currency of the Bay colony. Most people don't know that fact, that colonialism wasn't just one big sweep. There was a contention led by values about how to relate to people who were coming from another place. We had our values in place, and there were struggles that we did not win. But it's like Standing Rock. We did gain an understanding of what was necessary for the next periods of history. When we were forced out of our places, we had to reestablish connection with place. So Standing Rock, when it ended, there was a lot of sadness. That connection, it's just, when I'm not doing well, or, I'm a little frustrated, I think about walking through the village, and I think about the smells and hearing the kids running around and laughing, and dogs and horse racing going on in the distance, and just the smell, different smells of food being cooked all over. So I'm sorry, that was a long and Renee, you asked me a question that is very emotional for me.
I understand, and I really am glad to be on the call, and hopefully you and I can talk after the call.
Okay, sounds good.
I'll put my information in the chat, but thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, before we get to Marnie, it seems about in the chat, most people are asking how they can get in touch with Indigenous tribes within their areas. Could you have any advice for that? Like, can they reach out to you? And what would you like to say about that?
I would say, ask Grandma Google. That's what we call, in Indian country, we would call Google Grandma Google. She knows all. And just see who are the tribes, both federal and state recognized tribes, and where their tribal headquarters are. And, just look into your state. And it's, the interesting thing is that, we are the only people in this place that have had a self-governing land base since the beginning of time. We're the only people. And so our experiences in expanding and developing democracy are very, good, bad, and ugly, but nevertheless, there's a history of democracy that predates colonialism. And so we are governments, we're sovereign nations that are based on the US Constitution. And so the role that we play in climate fights and pipeline fights and toxic dumping, in any kind of environmental struggle, has the added power of being sovereign nations with a legal standing in order to take judicial action. We're the only entity that can challenge, but on that basis. So that is why for the last 20 years, the major national environmental justice struggles have been initiated and or co-led by tribal communities. The power of our sovereignty, therefore, we're dual citizens. We are citizens of our nations, conferred by the US Constitution. And the treaties we signed and the agreements we signed, therefore protected, not conferred by the Constitution, protected by the Constitution. And we also have US citizenship, which was unilaterally conferred 100 years ago last week. 100 years only 100 years we've been citizens with allegedly the right to vote. But it wasn't until the 60s and early 70s that all of us had the right to vote in every state. The background of that unilateral congressional action was because there was an idea that if Native people were given the right to vote in the general elections, then we would give up more land for that privilege. Sorry, Charlie, that didn't work. They could not erase us with the illusion of democracy. We've never had a multiracial democracy in this country. And when we do, through all of our creative organizing and work to expand democracy and protect what we have, we will create a vision and implement a vision of a truly multiracial democracy where sovereignty is actually achieved, where certain basic rights that have been denied, like the right to vote. We are in since the 70s, we have been fighting for the right to vote, and it is endless. We have lawsuits in a number of states underway because the state will decide, oh, we don't need to put up a polling place there. And already people have to drive 15 miles one way to vote. So then they remove it. They don't tell the tribal government. And on election day, our votes don't get cast. So I say all that to say that ask Grandma Google. It is very important that you reach out and talk because people don't. You'd think, oh, we're another community in North Carolina. There's a C3 table that organizes voter engagement. 90 organizations in North Carolina, very complicated state legislative fights. And of course, it is a swing state in the national elections. 90 organizations. When I asked the executive director, what tribes? There's 330,000 Indians in the state of North Carolina. And I said, what tribes, what urban Indian groups are on your table? And they were like, no, none. 330,000 Indians in North Carolina. So just ask Grandma Google, and then you won't be in that position when I ask you, oh, what tribe are you working with? What community groups?
Mhm. Nice.
Thank you. And going to Marnie, your question next.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Marnie Jackson, she, her. I am in Snohomish Land, on Snohomish Land, an island once known as CHEJ, now known as Whidbey, in the Pacific Northwestern corner of the United States. And my understanding is that the tribal histories of this place and the present tribal interrelations among and between tribal groups is complex. And so my question relates to, for instance, I identify myself as being on Snohomish Land. This land was also culturally significant and a seasonal home for people of Stillaguamish, Suquamish, Coast Salish, Coast Salish being a collective, Lower Skagit. Many people survived by being signatories to treaties, and some moved to reservations. Many survived by staying on their land and adapting to living among colonizers. And today there are people who have federal tribal recognition from the United States government and people who don't. And all of them, all Indigenous people of this region have ancestral and current ties to place. And so as I'm navigating being a white nonprofit leader on colonized land, I often encounter relationships between and among tribal people where there are tensions between and among tribal people about identity and history and affiliation with or lack thereof with a federally recognized group of tribes, for instance. And I try to walk diplomatically in the midst of this, because I recognize that every Indigenous person who is here today survived because they chose what was right for them and their family, because their ancestors chose for them to survive. And yet I sometimes feel concerned that I may ally myself with one perspective against another. For instance, I've been critiqued for recognizing more of the people for whom this land had significance, and that I ought to, for instance, recognize it as Snohomish land and only Snohomish land. And I've also been critiqued for not naming the other people for whom this was a seasonal place of harvest and gathering. So I guess as a white nonprofit leader doing environmental work in a place with really dynamic and complex tribal history, and how that tribal history was interrupted and changed by colonization, how can I be in relationship with that complexity in a good way?
Thank you so much for your question. I just left Muckleshoot Reservation just a couple of days ago. It's beautiful. We've done a lot of work out there. First of all, migration is, always will be, part of the human condition. It's not a big crisis at the border right now, like it's some new thing, they're discovering Plymouth Rock, but migration for economic reasons, climate, for adventure, for love. I migrated for love way too many times. But people migrate. And so you have something like the Yellowstone National Park. We've been working with the Parks Department and Wind River and a number of the tribes, because there are 49 tribes from as far south as Oklahoma that have ancestral connections to Yellowstone, that they would go there, spend a year traveling there, gather, hunt, gather medicines, and then travel back a year. So we worked with them on bringing together the 49 tribes that have ancestral responsibility, relationship, and therefore responsibilities, and should be considered in the course of the Park Service's indigenizing of Yellowstone as the first national park. And I think this process of how it is that we gather together within Indian country, I'm speaking, and how we build our power together to have impact on conditions and policies is at the center of Native Organizers Alliance work, and is at the center of groups that are trying to affect change. And it is a struggle. It is always a struggle. It will always be a struggle. Why? Because we are operating under conditions of scarcity and the values that come with it. And we are operating under the history and policies, yet still from the federal government, that have a tendency to divide people who share values and common goals from one another, and make funding or access a competition rather than an inclusionary process. And so one of the biggest things that began from the onset of first contact was the idea of how to divide tribes against one another. That continues today. It played a big role in the land grabs on the East Coast, where different colonial powers would pit one tribe, long-standing rivalries between two tribes, and pit them against one another. We have the situation, though, that the federal government has pursued a divide and conquer policy when it comes to federal recognition, meaning the responsibility to fulfill agreements and treaties. And what they've always done is to be in the business of deciding who's Indian and who isn't. And for many, many tribal leaders, that's not acceptable. It's our tribal government's right and responsibility to decide, be it a state-recognized tribe or a federally recognized tribe. And that tribes who are on the state level, who have community, like in Washington State, all those tribes should have the right. That is something that is a basic democratic structural reform that's necessary. The sooner we can move in that direction with points us towards a more deeply democratic political and economic system, the closer we move towards that horizon goal, the more possibilities and hope that we'll have for the tribes that have not received federal recognition to get federal recognition. Indian tribes that oppose bringing in state groups and continuing to broaden the federal recognition status of tribes are doing so in a very short-sighted way, in my opinion, because they're going at it from the angle of a finite amount of resources, that we are constantly under-resourced in housing, education, land management. We are constantly being under-resourced. We have never run, meeting those services, meeting the needs of every community. And so they're looking at it from a declining slice of the pie, rather than how we look at it is we're stronger together, and that the more pressure we put together with allies and others who are concerned about a policy or an issue that we're working on, the more the better, the more possibility of compelling some change. I would also say that as someone in your position, I think you have to be guided by how Indians, also people like myself, how we walk. And that is this: there are elected tribal governments that must be respected. They are good, bad, or ugly. They are the governments that represent us, and they are elected. That's one level of relationship building that is not easy, but necessary. The second thing is respected. There's elected leaders and there are respected leaders. And I know that there are many who would like to be a respected leader, who use social media and all other kinds of ways of trying to promote themselves as the spokesman. Well, I am not the spokesman of American Indians, spokeswoman. But when you're working in communities, anybody who tells you that they're representing, well, you have to use practice-based evidence. You have to understand who is in motion, who is around that individual. Where did they come from? Where are they moving? What are their values? And then how to interact with them. And that is a Lakota, Nakota, Dakota kind of, it is spelled out in many of the teachings, but it's something that in many tribes, we don't look at an individual and make up the story in our head about who they are and what they're like. We struggle for that eagle-eyed point of view where you're looking at this person in relationship to all other things, and that there's impact and interaction. And where did they come from? Practice-based evidence. Where are they going? What are they actually doing? And headed in which direction? And those are the leaders that are respected leaders, that have long-term relationships that people see as a struggle to match word with deed, because we all mess up, period. But there are people over time who show that they struggle to meet their values and on a day-to-day basis. And I'm really glad that someone like you is working in Washington. It's a very important state, and when it comes to environmental justice, but also the struggle for sovereignty.
Thank you. I really appreciate your rich answer.
Yep, right. I think Mateo, you're next in the queue. Just identify yourself, where you're from, please.
Hello, Jingzu Mateo. My name is Mateo. I live in currently unceded Tongva and Quiche territory, also known as Los Angeles.
Yeah.
It's one of the biggest intersections of Native people throughout Turtle Island have come to LA.
Yes.
I'm really here, sister, is just to really network with Native people. The work that I do is I work primarily with Black and Indigenous men who have found their way to Los Angeles. My background is theater, but working with Native people throughout the diaspora. And in Los Angeles, there's a big, as you know, there's a big intersection of Native people that have come here. And a lot of our young people, we get caught up in the neighborhoods and the gangs. And so that's where most of my work is. I'm just serving people to provide the space where they can see men, healing themselves. And how I came here was just honestly, I applied for this grant, or tried to, and I saw that email that said Indigenous. And so for myself, I would just want to link up and connect with Native people who are doing the work for our story to continue to live. And you're speaking, I'm like, oh, I want to find a way to connect with you. If you're ever in LA, make some tacos for you.
Oh, yes. I used to live in LA for
Okay.
a couple of months back before you were born.
but I'm really here standing on other men who have done the work before, who have created these circles, and so I currently work with we created this company called Voices of Sun, and we create space for Native men and Black men to gather tools to help their families to continue their own legacy. And most of the men that I work with, they have multiple jobs. They're, some of them are part of the, the powwow network. Some of them are part of the ceremony network. And, but they're really in it to help our men to not get involved with certain activities and be fulfilled men. But really, I just want to network with you, and I want to, tip my hat off to the work, and I'm really here for the work you have done before. But thank you for your existence.
Thank you so much. Urban culture, one thing that people who don't know a lot about Natives, they don't realize that we have been a part of urban culture for a very long time. We had cities, large cities with sports teams. They used to compete. We had all kinds of things pre-colonial. But even in the time of so-called westward expansion, we were creating every day traditional culture. We are creating traditional culture today that our descendants are going to say, what did they do in 2024 when such and such happened? Traditional culture is created every day. So what we have, which a lot of people who are not familiar with Native communities, we have created a very vibrant urban culture that has gone on for a long time. The first Native women's group, intertribal group, was founded in Chicago in the 1890s during the first World's Fair. And it was an organization called the American Indian Women's Society, Educational Society. Now, these were women who went there, who went to boarding schools and then went to some college and became teachers or social workers. But they were formed to protest how Native people were being portrayed in the first World's Fair, which is in cages, like animals. So the urban cultures have developed over time, and there were times in the 20th century where the federal government started programs that would try to encourage people to leave the land and go into the cities, enticing people with the idea of better life, better jobs, not just better jobs, and then with the hopes that therefore the land base would be reduced and be able to be taken over by the federal government. But surprisingly, our people always have tried to create communities. So the Minneapolis Indian Center, which is the oldest urban Indian center, which was founded in the late 60s in Minneapolis, Ojibwe people were moving down to the Twin Cities in order to find jobs. And then, they would know something, all relationality, in relation. They'd know somebody, someone knew somebody, and then somebody would sleep on somebody's couch. And then, people would be helping each other out informally. But the women, there were a group of women who said, hell, we got to go beyond this. Our people have greater needs than just sleeping on our couches. And they began the organizing to found the Minneapolis Indian Center, which is a center for intertribal culture, sharing of foods, providing services for urban Indians that they didn't have access to before, because it was like, if you're not in federal lands, your treaties don't guarantee that if you live in Minneapolis, you're going to get access to healthcare. So many of the urban Indian centers in San Francisco, Chicago, Milwaukee, Washington, Seattle, they are a reflection of urban Indian culture. And the powwow culture, these dances now that go on all over, they were created by Indians who said, you know what? I need to wear my regalia. I need to show up. I need to be with other people like myself who make it feel lonely in a city. And powwow culture, in the 50s was initiated, and ribbon skirts, the idea of there's one traditional way that all of our women dress is with the skirt with ribbons on it. Now, how that came to pass, who did that? I don't know, but God bless them, because it's one of the most beautiful aspects of our urban culture that is urban and res. So urban culture for all of us is a very important thing to study, because though some people might think that a city is a horrible place to live, especially if you've been living on the land, there's beauty everywhere.
Yep, great. Thanks, Judith. I think we're running short on time, but we do have time for one last question, and I think that's you, Lenore.
Yes, greetings. Hello, everybody. I looked really much forward to this meeting today, not knowing what to expect. I live in Massachusetts, exactly in a town some of us seek to rename, known as Turner's Falls, which shall be renamed as Great Falls. I live a few feet from the Connecticut River. And my interest in cross-pollinating with Native culture is right here. We have annual fests. We don't call it a powwow. Native people don't call it. It's in Unity Park. A massacre happened here in 1676. And that is a big part of our history here, besides the usual New England industry that came and went. But my search is to connect with healers, with herbalists, and with land stewards who are not shy to work with other community organizers. I would like, for instance, to create a small, it's called a tiny forest. That's a global movement now. And I sleep since September outdoors in a tent because of EMF. So that's why I cringed when you said Grandma Google. I have opinions about the telecom juggernaut. I'm very involved in that. And I steer people away from that G word. So long story short, I have some connections. David Brule is one of them, and we have Nolumbeka here as an organization. However, those Native people whom I meet annually at the festival, they come sometimes from very far away, which was the tradition, always to this part of the river. They live in is it called a bubble? They do not even desire to do the community work that a lot of white people work 24/7 on, like saving the Connecticut River from being pumped backwards. Our fish, the aquatic life is being destroyed, and the federal and the Massachusetts government is relicensing the First Light Canadian corporation, which has its tentacles all over the globe, to pump the water back into a mountain and back out for a few kilowatts of profit. And we activists are yearning for Native people to show up, and they don't. For the first time, we had 2 weeks ago a meeting where David Brule was present with the Wendell State Forest Alliance, which I was involved, am still, but not so much, because there are now a lot of people who are fighting for that forest not be logged. They still are. But my big concern is today the satellites in space. So I would like to connect with people on all those problems that humanity faces, including Gaza, including the children, including all the women that are being slaughtered on native land and everywhere, and about the wisdom of what's called the grandmothers, the elder wisdom, to integrate that with youth. And this is a little park, an outdoor classroom that also will have indigenous plants where the young people together volunteer with elder people and especially with native people to bring the indigenous plants back that are being wiped out everywhere. We have landscape businesses here. They mow down the lawn and the clover and the milkweed as soon as they pop up. The landscape business in the United States alone is guilty, not just the pesticides, but the mowing. Grow food, not lawns. We need native input. And our wonderful, what is her name? Robin Wall Kimmerer. Her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, is becoming almost a textbook for white people. It's being referred to all the time. We need these authors to come forward, and I hear that your agendas are so much in Washington, D.C. and Standing Rock. All of this is super important, but we need to have that cross-pollination on the local level. And I think I said enough now here. You get kind of the picture where there is a real thirst for community that crosses races.
Now that's a great last thought. We need to wrap up. So Judith, if you have a quick comment, great. Otherwise, we'll wrap up. Thank you, Lenore.
You're welcome. And thank you.
I agree with you. And what gives me hope is that there are people like yourself who will carry on the responsibility of that place, for that place, Turner's Falls. I used to live there. When I came back for Wounded Knee in 1973, I stayed for several months with friends who had a house on the river. And it's a beautiful place. But I'm just thankful people like yourself are taking on the responsibility for the future of that place. And I understand that you would like what you would like. And I think the work that you're doing, could be strengthened by more relationship with, in Massachusetts, the tribes there. And I know one of the tribes, the Wampanoag tribe, actually has an organic food farm that I think is in Adams. But I think it would be good to contact the Boston Indian Council, and they will connect you with the people who are more in the western part of Massachusetts. Because I parked my car in Harvard Yard. I grew up, my formative linguistic years were on the North Shore. So
great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you all for being here today. We will be sharing a recording. Everybody who signed up for the call will get a recording of our presentation and Q&A today. We have the chat, which had a lot of interesting comments in it. We'll share that as well. Those of you who may want to understand and learn more about Judith's work and the work of the Native Organizing Alliance, you can get on their mailing list. They've got lots going on, and I would encourage you to do that. We'll send you that as well as a follow-up. Judith, again, thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this and sharing some of your views and thoughts and ideas about organizing and operating in this world. So thank you all. We'll have another session, another training call next month. In July, we'll be talking about, we have someone from the Alliance for Justice going to help talk and share some ideas on what you can and can't do in an election year in terms of organizing and that sort of thing. So thank you all. Thank you again, Judith. Thank you for being here, everyone, and go forward.
Right.